we will answer the comprehension questions that we have for Soldiers Home. Now, they would be at the bottom of, or at the end of our story here. And our first question is going to read, what kind of person was Krebs before the war? What does the description in the first paragraph tell you about him? Why does the narrator mention that the fraternity brothers were all wearing the exact same height and style collar? So you could have several interpretations for this answer here. It is trying to give us a little bit of background of Krebs's life before he was a soldier, because our story is Soldiers Home. So the first paragraph would be telling us what he was doing beforehand. You could also say a fraternity, he had friends, that he had a social life here, showing that he was a part of this fraternity group. You could also say he was attending school, college. So this would show goals for the future, because as we read through the story, Krebs doesn't exactly have those friends when he returns. He doesn't exactly have his goal for the future. So you could write something along the lines of, it's showing what kind of life Krebs led before he went to the war. So for this question here, your answers could include, the first paragraph introduces the reader to Krebs's life before he was a soldier. It shows that he had a sense of community, a social life, and goals for the future, because otherwise he wouldn't have been in college. And then when we have, how does a vision of the Germany and the Rhine in the second paragraph contrast with the description in the first paragraph? Well, in our first paragraph, he's in a fraternity, then he enlists, right? And here, it's saying Krebs and the corporal look too big for the uniforms. The German girls are not beautiful. The Rhine does not show in the picture. So the Rhinelands would have been an area that Germany occupied during World War I. So America would have been occupying it, and the other forces there. So we could say this is showing maybe a detachment from his life. Like here, he's just with two German girls. We know that Krebs doesn't speak German, and another corporal. So we could say his social circle is quite different. He goes from a picture of him and his fraternity brothers directly to him, two strangers, and a corporal, and in another side of the world, in Europe, during a war. And he's going to say the Rhine does not show in the picture, where he maybe wasn't even observant of where he was. We could say maybe some disassociation was taking place. That could be our response for number 2 here. And what does the story mention the names of the battles? What experiences is Hemingway trying to invoke in the names? In what ways was World War I different from previous wars? So you could say this was by far one of the biggest, because we do call it the World War, right? And you could say these battles here is basically trying to get reader attention, because remember this again, you could sort of consider this historical fiction, kind of, because Krebs wasn't a real person, obviously, but many soldiers, veterans would have had a similar experience. So this could have been, you could interpret the reason for name dropping the battles was to make it more realistic type of fiction here. Also, if you were to look up these battles, they're going to be known for some of the bloodiest battles in World War I. And when we talk about how World War I was different than previous, there were new technologies invented, such as mustard gas, the machine gun, wrapping basically everything. During World War I, the world was wrapped. You could have took it, they used so much barbed wire that it could have wrapped around the entire world, like multiple times. So barbed wire, it really is, if people run through it or cross over it, it causes a lot of damage. So just the scale of World War I would have been different. And the introduction to new weapons of war was quite drastic compared to other ones. So these wars here is supposed to, readers that would know about history are going to realize that these would have been very traumatic battles to live through. So that could be one of the reasons they're listing that there. Or Hemingway is talking about name dropping the battles, adding to this historical aspect of the story. Now, this one is a longer passage. Nothing was changed in the town except that the young girls had grown up, but they lived in such a complicated world of already defined alliances and shifting feuds that Krebs did not feel the energy or the courage to break into it. He liked to look at them, though. There were so many good-looking young girls. Most of them had their hair cut short. When he went away, only little girls wore their hair like that, or girls that were fast. They all wore sweaters and shirt waists around Dutch collars. It was a pattern. He liked to look at them from the front porch. He liked the round Dutch collars above their sweaters. He liked silk stockings. He liked the way their bobbed hair and the way they walked. So this obviously just shows, you could say, that Krebs is a young man and he has an interest in, dating. Maybe because we also know that Krebs he's just watching them. He's not trying to socialize with them. And when it's saying he found already defined alliances and shifting feuds too complicated for him, we could say that this is kind of showing how Krebs left, but his town moved on. And these people have changed in his community, and he doesn't feel as though he fits in anymore. And we could say that he's lost basically his drive to fit in, to form personal relationships, to build friendships with others. Like, he's lost his motivation to do that. And that could definitely show us, pointing to it, maybe some signs of a depression here, that he knows he's interested in having a meaningful relationship, but he just can't bring himself to do it. So that definitely shows us, it's showing how his town moved on without him, basically, and he does not have the drive or motivation to try to get back into this world. And we know from the first paragraph that he was in a fraternity at college, so this world would have been normal to him before he left. But now those types of relationships, dating, is just not something that he feels he can do. He's kind of watching life pass him from the sidelines. And Krebs thinks about lies in the story. What kinds of lies does he tell or refuse to tell? Why do they nauseate him? In what way might this be connected to his war experiences? On the first page here, we have lies that he is telling. Okay, so he's saying his lies were unimportant lies and consisted in attributing himself to things other men had seen, done, or heard of. Even his lies were not sensational at the pool room. The acquaintances who had heard detailed accounts of German women found chained to a machine gun and who could not comprehend or were barred from interest of it. Any German machine gunners who were not chained were not thrilled by his stories. Him telling the lies, we could say this was just to get people to listen, to maybe have a chance to tell not his story, but even if he's just talking about the war, just to maybe get out some of his traumas. That could be, or we also know people might be telling war stories to impress. And obviously that would be something that he would find distasteful for sure. And we could also say, if he was in an occupying place, so he had said he got back after other people. So his duties might have been not exactly like heroic war stories, but rather, keeping order in a military sense, because the Rhine was going to be occupied by America after the ending of World War I. So you could say this was a way to just talk about his experiences and have other people listen. He didn't really the lying and making things more heroic than they seemed was just a part of it. And then we have his relationship with his sister. Now, some people might have thought that was a little weird, but we would say the purpose of the relationship with his sister is she's just a little kid. So she really doesn't know what is going on with Krebs's life and what he experienced in World War I, obviously. So when she's saying, like, I'll tell them you're my boo, aren't you my boo hair? This wouldn't be like her asking to be her brother's boyfriend. Obviously, he's in his early 20s, and then she'd be like around 9. So there's a big age gap there. You could say it's not a stressful relationship. She's non-judgmental of him, unlike the mom. Well, the mom's not being too judgmental on purpose, you could say, but she's not really asking him, what is he doing with his life? What happened in the war? Why don't you have a girlfriend? She's just saying, do you love me? Will you always love me? It's just a loving relationship. She's going to be supportive of him in the way that she knows how. And she's not really, you could also say it kind of shows the relationship between him and his sister. Also will kind of show that Krebs, what he does in his everyday life. Because when he gets up, his sister, you old sleepyhead, what do you ever get up for? This could kind of show us that Krebs spends a lot of time sleeping. And when we think about people that are having in depression, sleeping is definitely a big sign of that. So we could also use the comments of Krebs' sister to characterize what Krebs is going through. We could maybe characterize him as a character undergoing in the depths of a depression. And the scene with his mother. So here you have the mother telling him to, what are you going to do with yourself? She also said, go down and talk to your father. And we also have his mom comparing him, saying she's worried about him. The sister wasn't saying she's worried. She's just saying she loves him, right? And she had also, the mom brings up this other guy, Charlie Simmons, making this comparison. Look at, why can't you be like this guy? You could say that's one of like the worst things to say to someone who's undergoing like a hard time, telling them to, why aren't you like this other person? So the comparison between the sister and the mom, sister, childlike innocence, obviously, loving and affectionate, not pressuring him into things. Whereas the mother, she is being a little demanding, pressuring him, trying to get answers from him, where the sister wasn't, right? And then we have, although Krebs' father and grandfather are mentioned, all the encounters shown in the stories are with women. Why might Hemingway shape the story in this way? What does Krebs think about the relationship between his father and his mother? We could say this is kind of like the time of this strong silent type, where men weren't really sharing their feelings. And when she's saying, your father doesn't, it's kind of like the mother just speaking for the father. We could say, maybe the reason it's focused on the women is if his father also had some traumatic experience in his life, then maybe we could say that it's just something that runs in their family. That these men, when they go to war, they just don't talk about it. And then they kind of build a shell of themselves in a way. Because in the end, we learn that Krebs just kind of moves on. Like, it's going to say he goes to Kansas City, gets a job, and she would feel all right about that. But how exactly does Krebs feel? Maybe he just goes on with his life, never speaking about his trauma, never trying to like reach out and build a true, human connection with people. He becomes very like shut off here. We could see that being likely because it seems as though his father was that same way. We have a story where the father never really talks to Krebs. We never really have any dialogue between Krebs and his dad, which could show something about masculinity. You could make a point about when men experience traumatic events, they might be more likely to hide their feelings from others, which can definitely not be good for your psyche. We could also say his mother and his sister, they're both telling him they love him. And by only showing the little sister and the mother here, we could maybe make this point that Krebs is turned off from love and opening up to other people. And he's very just maybe detached. And also, a woman is going to represent, specifically in this time, like domestic life. So we could say this idea of Krebs having a healthy family of his own. His mother's still trying to convince him of this, but we aren't really sure if that's possible. So it's showing the fact that Krebs doesn't have a very strong relationship with his father. Another thing we could say, he doesn't have that camaraderie, like back when he would have been in the army or serving overseas, he would have been, surrounded by other men, other soldiers. And then he returns and it seems as though he doesn't have any friends, any male friends. And he also lacks this relationship with his father. So it kind of shows how things are even, more different than when he was overseas in a not so good way. And from our story's resolution, we can really interpret that Krebs didn't deal with his problem. We can assume, well, number one, post-traumatic stress disorder wouldn't have even been around until like the 1980s. Wouldn't have even been a diagnosis. They would have just called it shell shock. So you could say that Krebs moved on with his life without dealing with these traumas, without having anyone to confide in, and he just kind of did what he felt pressured to do. He got this job. He also moved away from his family. So you could say maybe he moved away from his family on purpose so that he wouldn't be around people that cared about him. And if it does not say, well, we know he wanted his life to go smoothly. We aren't very sure if his life is going to go smoothly, but we do know that he had a lot of guilt, maybe, about his mother for sure. And rather than trying to recover these relationships, he just decided to leave, which you could say this can be interpreted as Krebs is not going to have the best life after this war. He's probably going to be somewhat of an introvert and ignoring. It might be hard for him to find a relationship, especially moving to a town by himself, away from his family. We could interpret this to mean that Krebs did not have some positive healing experience. Maybe he just moved on to avoid answering these questions from the people that loved him, which it could be interpreted as a pretty sad ending here. And those would be how you could interpret these questions for Soldier's Home. But remember, there can be a lot of different answers for these questions. As long as you are backing up your responses with evidence from the text, any answer can be supported.